look at the stuff we can do with geophysics and even what we can do in terms of extraction. So I think this is the beginning of another, I'm gonna say silver age because we're at a silver conference, but another silver age in terms of exploration. I think the potential for what we can find out there is tremendous.
Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Mark is here with you live from the Silver Symposium at Spokane, Washington. And I am joined by quite a talented geologist, Lauren Megaw of Reyna Silver, who also at the symposium and doing a lot of good things for Reyna Silver, and also quite knowledgeable about geology, the silver market, and all sorts of good things. So, Lauren, it's a pleasure to sit down with you today, and it's been nice talking with you and getting to know you. And how's everything going with you so far?
Oh, I mean, I'm really excited to be here. I mean, also, I have to say thank you for having this podcast. It's been part of it's one of the daily podcasts that show up in my subscription, so thank you. And it's really lovely to actually talk to you in person rather than just hearing you while I'm folding laundry. So thank you for that. But Silver Symposium was my first conference ever working for an exploration company. Last year, came here, sort of my first. I fell in love with it, and it's really nice to return and see everyone and see where things are going. And the market's in a different spot than it was a year ago, but I think there's also some people who've made some big strides in the last year in terms of what they're doing, what they've discovered, where things are going. So I'm excited to be here and excited to see what this next year brings.
Yeah, and in terms of the environment, we'll get in a little bit to what you guys are doing with Reyna, but as a geologist, how do things change? I guess you have to be a lot more efficient when prices are down and there's a little less room for error. But current environment with things that are going on today, how does that change the way you have to look at things?
So I think it's a two-parter. One, I think that when the market goes down, it really emphasizes the type of deposits that you're going after. Right. So we focus on high grade. And the reason we focus on high grade is because it means that when silver is at your worst possible nightmare, the companies at least survive it. The investors can sleep at night. It also has to be big enough so that you can survive to, the upswing so that you can party all night with whatever champagne brand you pick or fancy whiskey, right? But I think that also benefits a particular style of exploration. And it's the style that makes it a little bit harder to raise money for in some ways, because it's the long-term, disciplined approach to exploration. However, that's also the approach that benefits you when the market turns down and it's harder to get money, because you're being strategic, you're being diligent with picking where you're putting your hopes. And, that's the other big thing that comes out when the market turns down. The projects that seriously have the legs, a rising water in a tub all ships will float. The question is what happens when you pull the plug. And when that happens, we're hoping that with the way that we approach it, and the way that there's quite a few companies that are coming at it with this angle, because you want to survive multiple market cycles. You want to make serious value for your investors. And, right now is the time for boots on the ground work, sending geos out to do good mapping, solid structure work. That's money well spent. Doing geophysics, doing as much as you can on the front side before you put the drill hole in and see whether or not you're right. So I guess my general thought is that when the market turns down, it really ends up supporting the idea of having a disciplined approach to exploration.
Yeah, and that certainly makes sense, although perhaps one of those things easier said than done. And I guess I would wonder, why wouldn't everybody be approaching it that way? I mean, it would seem like.
And I think the tricky part, right, is that it's hard to raise money on this approach because It's not as flashy necessarily. And because typically going at it this way, thinking, I like to paint. So if you think about sketching out a big painting, right? You don't want to just focus on painting the nose all the way in. All of a sudden you realize that it was in the wrong spot, right? But it could be an absolutely beautiful nose on the painting. The idea is that we need to sketch out what's going on, but to do that, you kind of have to have, when you're talking to an investor, it's difficult to talk about, well, we're sketching it and eventually it will turn into a painting. We're adding in the layers because we're trying to make a masterpiece here. We're not just doing, a plein air quick painting. And I think one of the reasons why that's a difficulty in this space is that there's a disconnect between the technical side of things and the general understanding for most investors. There's a crazy learning curve, whether it's from the capital side or the geology side. We use all these big words and we talk about things and you end up in your bubble. So you're like, oh yes, everyone knows what a porphyry is. I can just talk about porphyries and riff on this geochemistry. Meanwhile, someone who's coming into this space is like, I'm sorry, what did you just say? And I think that's one of the hard parts, because if you've got something that's going to go into production in a couple of years, or we've got really high grade right now, even though, maybe it's shallow or it's got some other issue, or it's something that's being reworked, to go and find something new, to go find something big, requires in some ways a geo understanding. And then the question is how you can translate that. And I think it's one of the factors that I hope to help with in this space. And podcasts like what you guys do is another way for people to sort of break through those barriers.
Right. And certainly there's not a lot of those deposits out there. So what are some of the starting points in terms of at least identifying where to go after?
So, one of the old sayings, as it were, is the best place to look for a mine is in the head frame, in the shadow of the head frame, right? But the trick is it's not a question of going in and twin holing underneath that and because realistically, the old timers were hungrier and harder working than we'll ever be. The question is if you can take that idea of, okay, there's something here. What did they miss? What part of the system is this? And we were talking about that earlier, where we like to break things down into boxes because otherwise geology totally break our brains. Right? We want to say like porphyry, skarn, carbonate replacement deposit, right? And we're now learning that that's all actually part of a continuum, and they're all related to each other. So you can actually move your way through systems. We can go after blind discoveries now. I mean, you look at something like Mexico, which has produced 25% of silver in human history, right? Most of those deposits were found in outcrop back in the day. They've been chased down to depth. Technology has changed again and again, and so we're able to find more in those same areas. Well, that's a place that's 50% undercover with volcanics and alluvium. So there's a whole bunch of blind discoveries to be made. Same up in Nevada, right? If you look up. And so the question becomes, can we take modern techniques? Can we find those next big things? And if you're in an area where you go, okay, look at Reyna Silver's Gigi project. We have a project that's at the heart of the Santa Eulalia district. We know from studying carbonate replacement deposits throughout the world that district produced 500 million ounces of silver and just the distal portion of the system. The heart of the system, the source, and the proximal area that was in contact with that hasn't been found. So you go, where did all this mineralization come from? And then on top of that, are there additional distal portions of the system, right? That's what we get excited about is, and that's really where I think exploration is going to be moving towards, is saying, okay, the old timers got part of the story. How much bigger does this story get? Right. And, you hope that you have a Lord of the Rings kind of thing. So, there's going to be some sequels and some prequels and all that aspect as well.
So how much of it often comes down to where the old timers, as you affectionately call them, miss something versus, as we were talking about earlier, you have a lot of technology and equipment that makes you wonder, geez, like how were these people doing this hundreds of years ago? How much of it is one versus the other there?
Well, I mean, once again, I'm going to use the example of Mexico because that's my basis of knowledge in a lot of ways. But you're in a place where when they came up with selective flotation in the 1920s, that really changed what certain deposits could do. When they came out with trackless mining, that really changed what was possible. But at the same time, you're also dealing with a place where a lot of money coming in for exploration sort of petered out in the 1960s because for about 30 years, Mexico had a rule where companies had to be majority owned by a Mexican company, like a mining company. And so because of that, a lot of money left. Money came back in, but during that time period, this really cool thing called plate tectonics took off, right? And so while that was happening in other places, that wasn't necessarily a big factor in terms of what was being done at some of the districts in Mexico. So you have a resurgence of exploration in Mexico in the 90s where people are bringing these modern techniques, and then Bre-X happens. And then, the dot-com boom, or bust. And then, 2008. So you end up with these situations where, we're now able to bring in essentially the invention of calculus into exploring, or the discovery of calculus into exploration in Mexico. And so, it's not a case of the old timers weren't looking for it. It's a case of they didn't have the tool. And so now we have these new tools, we have these new ways that we can go after things. And that's, look at the stuff we can do with geophysics and even what we can do in terms of extraction. So I think this is the beginning of another, I'm going to say silver age because we're at a silver conference, but another silver age in terms of exploration. I think the potential for what we can find out there is tremendous.
Yeah, well, I know what you mean. Even right here to our left, we have 3D mapping, imaging, and it's interesting coming to the shows and just seeing the different things that are out there. Another thing you mentioned earlier before we hit the record button, which I guess is a role that you're filling, is for people who are new to this. And like you said, it's like a whole different language and a different skill set, but and you're doing in the IR department, but also have the geology background. But for people who are newer, what is a way that they can begin to break these things down, or whatever that learning curve is? But how do people get started in being able to interpret things properly?
There's actually some fantastic YouTube professors that are actually going out and teaching some basic geology because that helps a lot. I'm hoping to also, with Reyna Silver, we're about to do a whole bunch of serials talking about how do you explain a carbonate replacement deposit to someone who does not have that experience, right? I mean, not everyone was super excited in chemistry in high school. So, I like to use the analogy when I'm talking about carbonate replacement deposits is talking about public transportation systems, hopefully in a functional city, right? When we talk about a source intrusion or porphyry, what we mean is like a bus terminal, for instance. And that scarring zone, that's the alteration that surrounds the intrusion. That's for the downtown area, because you've got a bus going out and different elements are getting off at different spots in the bus. So because of what we know from studying these systems, because they're continuous, because they're zoned, when we intersect in different parts of mineralization, we go, this is the neighborhood we're in. These are the elements we see. Okay, we have an idea where we are. We can move around, and that's part of what makes those blind discoveries we were talking about now possible. But I'm hoping that that we can help as an industry, as through podcasts, through YouTube videos, and through talking with investors, help illuminate a bit about what's going on, because it's hard to be confident in what you're investing in if you don't understand what the premise is, why we're doing what we're doing. Hopefully Reyna can help out with that a bit, and always excited to hear if there's other groups or other YouTube, that we can send people to, because I think that's going to be one of the big hurdles for this space, is taking down that learning curve and making it approachable.
Yeah, I agree. Unfortunately, there's mining stock education out there. Rob Keene's Gold Silver Pros does a good job of explaining these things, and we have a great person in the IR department of Reyna. So I think it's good that we have people like you that can put things into context in a way people can understand. And perhaps before we wrap up, we could touch on Reyna. I know that you've been finding some gold mineralization in addition to the silver mineralization, which is a nice pleasant surprise. And anything else you'd like to mention about the recent projects?
So that project is our Batopilas project. That's in Mexico's historically highest grade silver district, Batopilas, which was actually a native silver district. And kind of crazy being in an area where the Spanish came in looking for gold. They found native silver. We come in as a silver exploration company. We go into this underexplored area. We find gold. We don't find sort of gold. We find mineable widths and grade of gold.
They weren't expecting that at all prior?
Nope. Was not expecting to see that. So we've now had to put a little bit of a pause button, a little timeout, and say, we should probably figure out how this fits in with the overall picture before we move forward, because the gold's taking advantage of some of the same structures the silver is. So we have the opportunity to leverage that gold to find more silver, and vice versa. So, I realize we're at a silver conference right now, and we've got a gold situation, but I think we call that a Hollywood problem.
It's still okay to be talking about that here, I think. No one will mind.
So, that's been exciting with Batopilas. At Gigi, in the spring, not only did we expand the footprint of this brand new intrusive and this brand new skarn mineralization we found, not the source, but we think we're getting close. We also found, so for context, you've got this intrusive down deep, about 1,200 meters of some of the most productive limestone in history sitting on top of it. And about 400 meters to 700 meters above that, our recent drilling, we found what we call feeder bleeder structures. So these are what are used in carbonate replacement deposits to go back to the super high grade ore bodies that make them famous. So right now we're doing some geophysics, we're doing some additional groundwork, we're doing some 3D modeling to pull together all the historic data so that we can be hopefully killing two birds with one stone in the upcoming drilling. So we can find the source and potentially, fingers crossed, some upper level features as well. And then for the third one, because we are absolutely spoiled at Reyna, Medicine Springs, we're going to be drilling there this fall. I mean, when we got those Jasperoid studies back, so Medicine Springs is a carbonate replacement deposit, we think. But we think it's intact. We think we have the full spectrum, from the porphyry driving it all the way out to the distal last gasp, the last elements that fell asleep on that bus we were talking about earlier. We can see that in the Jasperoids. When we tested those, we got back, my dad considers the best Jasperoid study he's ever seen. Absolutely gorgeous copper, lead, zinc, silver zoning. Bullseye. And there's two factors that we're excited about this. One, we got back the kind of copper numbers that say there's a possibility that this porphyry isn't a barren porphyry, that the bus station's not just sort of like a place you want to get out of. We're near Ely. We're near some other big copper porphyries that were surrounded historically by carbonate replacement deposits. So there's that little, when you're going to sleep at night, God, wouldn't that be so cool? And we're also getting silver numbers in the exhaust essentially that are running 400 to 1,000 grams per ton silver. So really excited to start drilling there this fall and see whether or not we're right. See whether or not there is a big old CRD lurking under the surface.
Yeah, and that's pretty exciting. Did you ever imagine that all three projects would be seemingly on track? That seems like a nice little parlay that you pulled off there.
You know, I think that's what you dream of. It's part of why I'm excited about working in, and maybe part of why I love doing this. But it also comes down to picking the right projects, and we've got the kind of team where we're able to have access to that kind of projects, and we have the exploration expertise to actually go after them in these big scale fashions. So, I mean, Medicine Springs is over 4,000 hectares. I mean, granted, when my dad and I went and checked it out the first time, much smaller. It was like a pair of kids in the candy shop. We saw all these features, like of the 13 features that tell you this thing could be a big carbonate replacement deposit. We have 10 before the first drill hole. We got got back into cell phone service. And after calling my mom, because that's very important, we called Jorge. And we're like, we need to quadruple the claims, right? So, I have to be careful to not get too excited and talk at Mach 10, but Medicine Springs will be, we'll see where it goes from here.
Well, Lauren, congratulations. It's nice, especially when you grow up with someone who's an expert geologist, but it seems like that wasn't forced on you at all. Your passion for what you're doing is really, really beautiful to see, and nice that you're joined the Reyna team along with Jorge and everybody else there. And again, people can find out more at reynasilver.com, and just appreciate you being here at the conference and also breaking things down. You have a good knack for explaining things, and I think the silver world is grateful to have you as a part of it, and good to finally catch up with you.
Thank you so much. It's been delightful to actually get to meet you in person and be a part of this. And, anyone has any questions, comments, concerns, jokes, I'm still waiting for someone to send me a joke. Happily send me an email at Lauren at Reyna Silver. I like talking and explaining things to people. So,
well, you're good at that, and hopefully you'll get some good silver jokes. And at least now, when you're folding your laundry, you'll be able to hear yourself on the show. I appreciate you watching, and it's an honor that people as talented as you are watching the show. And it's really been nice seeing a lot of the different people at the conference, and pleasure to finally meet you in person. And we'll look forward to doing this again soon.
Thank you. It was great having a chat.